every other form of competitive advantage that you have can be quickly duplicated in this digital age, right? If you have a product feature advantage, a competitor can copy it. If you have a service advantage, a competitor can hire a few people and deliver a similar service. But what they can't replicate are your customer success stories, the successes in the first place, as well as then customers telling those stories for other people to hear. So how do you copy that? You can't.
Welcome to another episode of the State of Customer Storytelling podcast. My guest today is Jeff Ernst. Jeff is the co-founder and CEO at SlapFive, which is the first customer marketing software platform. He started SlapFive because of his belief that customer stories are really the last bastion of real competitive advantage for B2B firms. And he's also the co-founder of the customer-led movement, which we can get into. And he has an extensive background as an executive, a founder, consultant, and an analyst, having previously served in leadership roles at the Buyer Persona Institute, Forrester Research, Kadient, and actually many other companies in that software and technology space. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me on, and congratulations on your podcast. Great to hear that you're doing this.
Absolutely, and very excited for the chat today. I know I've learned I've learned a lot from you over the years and all of our conversations. So let's dive right in. I know that you mentioned customer stories told in customers' voices are really the last bastion of competitive advantage, especially in B2B specifically. Let's dig into that more. Tell me more about that. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yes. Let's dig into that, because if you think about it, every other form of competitive advantage that you have can be quickly duplicated in this digital age, right? If you have a product feature advantage, a competitor can copy it. If you have a service advantage, a competitor can hire a few people and deliver a similar service. But what they can't replicate are your customer success stories, the successes in the first place, as well as then the customers telling those stories for other people to hear. So how do you copy that? You can't. And so that's why I say it's really the last bastion of competitive advantage, because it's the one thing that can't be stolen or copied or replicated. And in the digital age, everything else is just so quickly to be done. But also when you think about today's modern buying cycle, and I did a lot of research at this, both at Forrester. I built the buyer persona research methodology. And then, as you mentioned, I've worked with the Buyer Persona Institute. I've done thousands of buyer interviews. And the most important thing, the biggest questions, fears, and doubts that buyers have as they go through a buying process at every single stage, every one of them is best told in the voice of your customers. As much as we love to put out our own product collateral and we all love our products, what buyers really want to hear is they want that crystal ball into what life is like as a customer. And any company that's able to provide that crystal ball is going to have a distinct competitive advantage over those that can't, because you're just going to earn trust. You're going to overcome whatever fears or doubts your buyers have, and they're just going to look at you much quicker as that trusted partner. So that's really what I mean, and I'm sure you're seeing it as well in your business too. That people come to you because they're also trying to solve that trust gap that exists in the market, and customer voice is the best way to fill that trust gap.
So true, and I know that you mentioned providing that crystal ball. I'm curious, how do you see customer storytelling kind of evolving, or how have you seen the space evolving over the past couple of years in terms of that? Is it firms need more customer stories to be competitive than maybe 5 years ago, maybe more segmented, and more accessible? But yeah, what are the shifts that you've seen as you've been very intimately involved in this space for many years now?
Yeah, for sure. And I like to think that I've helped lead some of this shift. Maybe that's a little bit of wishful thinking, but there's definitely a shift going on here, because the traditional mindset when it comes to customer proof are the things that I call like the happy quotes And the kind of the classic PDF case study written in the third person by a professional writer after interviewing your customer, where it's lost all that authentic first person tone of voice, right? It just happens in the traditional case studies tend to be all about they make your product the star of the story, not the customer. And so it just doesn't answer those biggest questions, fears, and doubts that buyers have, right? And if you go through and look at, if you do the analysis to really understand what are those questions, fears, and doubts that your buyers have, and then compare that to what's the insights delivered in your customer stories, you're going to see a huge gap. And so, like I said, historically, companies have always relied on these 4-page PDFs, challenge, solution, result format with the little happy quote in the sidebar, or they do the happy day scenario stories where, the customer was in a world of hurt. They came to us, wear the knight in shining armor, and now they're living happily ever after. I mean, that's the story arc of a typical customer story. But where I see it shifting now is it is aligning more with how buyers buy, because what you really need to do is understand, okay, what are those insights that buyers need in order to make a confident decision and buy from you? And it could be objections that they raise. It could be confusion that they have. It could be misunderstandings. And so I call this taking a more surgical approach, because once you understand those things, you can then frame the right questions to ask your customers so that you're sure to be gathering those types of insights. And so that's sort of like the subject matter of what you're capturing. And then, of course, there's the delivery side of that is the other half of the equation, right? Is that, video today is just so important. But I say video and audio today are both really important. But what they both have an advantage of over any kind of text format or written format is that you hear that authentic tone of voice. And that's how human beings decide whether to trust something, is from the tone of voice. When you hear the emotion, when you hear the anguish that the person might have been feeling, or the joy as they talk about their results, and also when it's done in a way that it's not just somebody sounding like they're reading from a script what they've been told to say, looking off, blah, 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 right? But when they're actually sharing their experiences and sounding authentic, I mean, that is just so critical today, because buyers are smart, right? And again, I'm focusing on buyers, and when I say buyer, it could be when you're going after net new logos, right? Those are buyers. When you're trying to get customers to onboard, okay, they're in buying mode. When you're trying to get existing customers to expand and buy more, okay, they're in buying mode. And when you want them to renew, they're in buying mode. So all of those cases is what I talk about with buyers, and this content needs to be speaking to all of them, and whatever those questions, fears, and doubts are that they have when they're in that mode.
It's so true. Like one, thing we say a lot is like, you don't get tone through text. It's just that
Right.
simple, right? Yeah. So one thing I'm also seeing, and I'm curious to get your take on, is like, I feel like, speaking of kind of contrasting like the old way with the future, right? To me, it feels like the old way was very much like customer evidence and customer proof is sort of like a checkpoint, later down the funnel, right? That was kind of the old way. Okay, like kick them over the line with the customer evidence. Versus now, it seems like, and the data obviously supports this. Is buyers today, they want to self-consume, right? They want to do their own research, and with that in mind, and they want to be able to dig into customer stories and customer content really at all stages of the customer journey. Now that the shape of that and the length and the format of that customer content may differ depending on the buyer journey, of course. But what do you think about that, and like that sort of like that shift?
Yeah, it is. And I think what falls under that shift that you just described is this whole idea of like customer reference programs, for example. And we're all used to having to hoard our customer references till the very end of the sales cycle, till it's the last thing you need in order to get a prospect over the finish line, and then you're going to go ask a customer to do a reference, because you don't want to burn them out and use the same customers over and over again. And so that's one of the kind of classical ways of thinking that gets in the way. And another one is that, yeah, we can't tap into our customers and even ask them to do a customer story until they've been with us for 3 years. They're totally happy. There's no upsell going on. There's no renewal discussions going on. There's no issues, there's support issues or open tickets. And like, how many customers are ever in that nirvana state? They're not. And so these are a couple of the areas where I try to get people to modernize their thinking, because some of the best stories might come from customers that are just signed on with you, right? That's when they're the happiest. That's when they can tell you how they went about evaluating and comparing their options in the market and why they selected you, and why they decided to make a change in the first place, which are amazing insights that customers have right after they sign the dotted line to be a new customer of yours that they might forget later on, right? And so I work with my customers to help capture stories at that point in time. And then at every other point in the sales cycle, there's those magic moments that we call SlapFive moments, where they finished onboarding. That's a great time to capture customer voice. When they, maybe after they've been with you for a year, it's a great time to start to ask about the value that they've been deriving and get examples and use cases of particular valuable things they've done. Maybe they filled out a net promoter score survey and they've given you a 9 or 10. That's a great time to get some feedback from them on why they gave you a 9 or 10 that could contribute to your customer story library. So these are just some of the ways that people need to kind of expand their thinking, because it's no longer about the monolithic case study or or just the happy quotes that people love to sprinkle all around their websites. It doesn't mean there's not a place for the happy quotes, right? But I like to say to a company, when you just get these happy trite quotes, read them out loud at your company meetings and get your employees jazzed, because that's really what they're good for. They give everybody goosebumps, but that they don't really serve the needs of a buyer who's trying to overcome their fears and doubts.
Absolutely. And to your point about, competitive advantage, like if your company, has happy quotes, and then the competitor has really what you're talking about, the real, insights and actually customers sharing, knowledge, experience, and advice, in rich media. I mean, who's going to have the competitive advantage, right? So super, super good point. I want to hit on like earned advocacy versus paid customer advocacy, and how does it sort of change, if it does, based on like company size, right? Because I think some smaller, companies are, think that, okay, it's all well and good, but I don't have a customer advocacy program. I'm a startup and I just need to quickly, get some social proof out there, right? How do you think about that sort of relationship between, of course, earned customer advocacy and paid customer advocacy?
Yep.
And of course, with the idea being, how is, if I'm a marketer listening to this, how can I succeed and do what we all want to do, which is more earned customer advocacy?
Right. Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that, and I'm glad you've been following that, because I coined those phrases probably about 5 years ago. Coined earned versus paid advocacy, but it wasn't totally original, because it was a colleague of mine at Forrester that coined the term earned versus paid versus owned media, and so I co-opted that and applied it to advocacy, because I think everybody knows in media that earned media is like your most valuable media. Right? I mean, you can pay all you want, but the ROI and the real bang for the buck comes from earned media. And so same thing with advocacy. I mean, so just to describe what I mean by that, this is, I think, where advocacy is shifting. And the reason why it's so relevant to customer stories is because the more you take a more modern view of advocacy, which is earned advocacy, the easier it's going to be to get customers to step up and want to share their stories. Because here's how we've always done it in the past. We think about customer advocacy as, let's identify the top 3 to 5% of our raving lunatic fan customers, and let's go after them and beg them to do favors for us, and we'll bribe them by paying them $500 to do a testimonial video, or we'll pay them, $50 to go write a review on G2, or we'll pay them, $300 every time they do a reference call or something like that. And so that's what I call paid advocacy, right? You're offering a bribe, and then the customer waits for the bribe to come, then they do it, and then they get their reward. It's like training a dog, right? The problem with that is that it turns your relationship with the customer into a transactional relationship, and it becomes one where they're only going to evaluate whether they do it based on the size and value of the reward. And if that's not sizable enough, they're going to say no. And it also, what it does is it releases the dopamine in the brain, right? If you're using gamification and leaderboards and things like that, which is not a long-lasting happiness drug in the brain compared to oxytocin, right? Which is, again, and I don't want to get too much into brain science, but I've studied it a lot. So earned advocacy is all about creating a two-way exchange of value with your customers. So you make them successful, the power of reciprocity is going to make them turn around and want to make you successful. And so this is how customer advocacy has evolved rapidly. And too many people are still in the paid advocacy realm. I'm trying to get more people to realize to do it this way. But with earned advocacy, you're running a program where the customers are given lots of opportunities to showcase their knowledge, experience, and advice. They're able to build their reputation. And so there's a lot of intrinsic value for them, especially to share their customer stories. So instead of giving them rewards and payments, instead they're getting intrinsic benefits by building their career, things that they value even more that are going to make them really feel more of a trusted relationship versus a transactional relationship with you. And this is what releases the oxytocin in the brain, the love drug, and builds long-term, lasting relationships with customers. So again, as it relates to customer stories, the best way to do customer stories is to be doing it throughout the customer lifecycle, not just saving them up until that one point, but in order to be doing that without hindering your customers, you need to be engaging them in acts of advocacy where they're mutually benefiting, so that they're going to be readily and anxiously awaiting the next opportunity that you offer them. And I can say, I've just done like 3 customer interviews for my clients today with their customers, and every one of them was like so appreciative. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for showcasing the work we've done. We feel like we've done so much great work, but we know we're still barely scratching the surface. So I'm honored that you want to recognize our success to date, right? And because that's the power of earned advocacy, right? So I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but it a lot of it comes down to the incentives. And I like to use the analogy, Sam, if you think about if you were to go to TripAdvisor and you were to see a review about a resort, and then you found out that person was paid $1,000 to write that review, how much trust are you going to put in that review? Or if you're looking to hire somebody and you go to their LinkedIn profile and you see a recommendation from them, but at the bottom it said, yeah, my former boss was paid $250 to write this recommendation. How much trust are you going to put in that? So I think that's the real huge need for us to get to earned advocacy, because buyers, again, they're too smart. They're going to see through people that are just out there being paid to shill for you.
It's so true, and to me, it comes also back to like the medium, right? And video and audio. You can tell when someone's just, cares genuinely, or if they're just, as you said, just kind of being paid to shill. It's the same reason why, people do, reference calls before hiring people, right? You're not going to conduct that over email, to check someone's background. You want to talk to the person,
right.
See how enthusiastic they really are. I love that point. And you brought up a good point about a two-way exchange of value. And that's so crucial. And I think one of the things that we, as customer marketers and marketing leaders, we think about a lot is like, one of the best ways to do that is like helping our advocates, build their reputation and career, of course, right? But sometimes that can be like sort of a nebulous thing to aspire to, right? And how do you go about that? How do you help people, build their reputation and career? Is it content and promoting that content, or what can we do to do that two-way exchange of value?
Yeah. So one of the mindset shifts, and I actually wrote a whole ebook about this, and the first point of my 8 points on how to go about this is the thing you have to put out of your mind is to go to customers begging them for testimonials, and when I say testimonials, I mean like the happy quotes, right? Not the great testimonial video work that you do, but so stop asking them for testimonial quotes, endorsements, or recommendations, because first of all, there's nothing in it for the customer to give you those things. And also, they oftentimes have handcuffs on. They're not allowed to do and shill for a vendor, especially in more regulated industries. It's especially hard. But then the larger the company, you ask, how does this vary by size of company? The larger the company you work for, the more you're prohibited from going on the record of endorsing or recommending a vendor. However, people are always sharing opinions. People love to share opinions. So what I coach people on how to do this is to say, make the shift from begging customers for their testimonial videos, endorsements, and recommendations. I'm sorry, testimonial quotes, endorsements, and recommendations, but instead present them with great opportunities to showcase their knowledge, their experience, and their advice. And if you think about it, everybody loves to share their knowledge because it makes them feel smart. Everybody loves to share their experience because it makes them feel successful. And everybody loves to share their advice because it makes them feel heard. And so I think that's a huge, huge difference. And it's all in how you present it to the customer. And so if you say to the customer, look, you've been with us for 2 years, you haven't done anything for us yet. I'm begging, begging, begging. My CEO wants us to do 3 case studies this quarter. Could you do one for us, please? It's like, no. It's a big burden. I mean, you're asking for a big burden, and there's nothing in it for them. Versus say, hey, customer, you've done some really impressive things. I think we have a great opportunity for you to showcase that, so other people that are behind you in their journey that might want to learn from. And so we've got this great opportunity for you to share the success that you've been experiencing. This is all part of how you craft the story too. And you want to craft the story such that it's about their success, not about how great the product is or service. And you want to make them the star of the story. And I can tell you that my whole business is built, and as is yours, on helping our clients get their customers to feel that way. It's never failed when you make that shift. I mean, begging people to do case studies always fails, but when you present it with these opportunities for them to showcase their knowledge, experience, and advice, it never fails. The only time I ever run into trouble or resistance or places where I might have to soft pedal it a little bit is where they say, yeah, but my company will still not let me go on the record and use my company logo publicly. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, what I say to my clients is, okay, so for that customer, they have some great stories that they're sharing. What if you tell that customer, we're not going to put this on YouTube or CNN or broadcasting it public for the world to see, but we'll use this in sales cycles that with highly qualified prospects, and now that customer has covered their butt and you've now controlled the distribution of that story. But even having a story like that you can use in your sales cycles, it's phenomenally successful. Because I talked about like the reference, overuse, and burnout earlier. Imagine now that your sales team can have this library of customer stories that they can use to reduce the need or deflect the need for these live one-on-one reference calls, and they can introduce them earlier in the sales cycle. That's a home run. And so there's also, there's how you position it to the customer. That's number one, first and foremost. But then there's also giving the customer some flexibility in how you use the stories that they capture. Not everything has to be made for primetime TV.
It's true. And how do you think about kind of deciding that, right? Because like you said, not everything needs to be, sometimes things, it's really about the content, right? And rough and ready is more than okay. And then, maybe if it's like a featuring on the homepage, it does, need to stand up to the quality or the design of the rest of the brand. Yeah. How do you think about that relationship in terms of the quality and setting an overall strategy around that? Is it just as simple as mapping it out and fitting it to the place, or what have you learned there?
Yeah, what I've learned there is, and what I coach my clients on too, is also to think about what strategic growth initiatives of your company are you trying to support with these customer stories that you're creating? If the strategic growth initiative that you're trying to support is to position your company as a thought leader and create a great brand impression about your company, then yes, the highly produced, and I've seen some of your work, it's amazing, the professionally produced work that you do.
Thank you.
I mean, that makes an amazing brand impression. on somebody that, put that on your homepage, showcase that, play that at the beginning of your sessions at your user conference, play it at your company meetings. It gives people goosebumps, right? It's so powerful. Some of the highly produced stuff may not be as credible when you're using it in place of a reference call. Okay, and so this is where I see some people making the mistake. They're trying to take the same vehicle and use it for all channels because I paid this much money for it. Let me just fire it everywhere. Where that more authentic, non-produced content might be a lot more effective and convincing when you're trying to use it because you've asked a customer to answer the 10 or 15 most frequently asked questions on your reference calls, and you've created a recorded reference, and you're now presenting all those. In those cases, the person's job is not, they're not looking to be entertained or for a brand impression. That person is looking to really get that crystal ball into what life as a customer is like. So they're going to be more concerned about, is this addressing this concern I have? Is it addressing this doubt? And if it doesn't, it's not going to be as effective. So in that case, it's sort of the substance is even more important than the style. And so there's a place for everything. But to answer your question, it's really, what is the strategic growth initiative or the challenge in the market that you're facing that you're trying to overcome with this customer story, and let that determine the format, how professionally produced it is, or versus how more authentic it is, and how you distribute it. And there's a need for everything. And as I said earlier, I mean, and too, the customer voice, it answers questions and solves doubts at every stage of the buying cycle. From very first awareness, it helps people kind of get a good feeling that other people have solved this problem similarly, all the way through evaluation, through purchase, and then through post sale.
So true. And like you said, it's really like a yes and, not like an either or, right? It all comes back to the strategy. I think, for anyone listening, that's, such a salient point is like, just like anything, first, it pays to get really clear on, what is the strategy, and, what are the key strategic initiatives, and understanding where are the gaps, and where, as you said, customer stories and customer content can fit in there. You mentioned reference calls a couple times, and I want to dig into that a bit, because it's reference calls, I think, are this sort of interesting, phenomenon where like the references don't necessarily like to do them. Buyers, salespeople don't like to give them out. Buyer, it's kind of like inconvenient for everyone, but it's sometimes, helpful. I mean, in some situations for sure, but like at the same time, I'm curious, just genuinely curious, like, do you guys think, and is it your goal somewhat to kind of, I don't want to say kill the reference call, that's a little too dramatic, but like,
right.
And to some extent, like, is that your goal? And yeah.
Yeah, well, you're never going to kill the reference call, right? Because there's always going to be a need to, either procurement requires the buyer to talk to 3 references just to check the box, or in some cases there might be some serious concern that a buyer has where they need to run that by a few, or maybe it also depends on the stage of life cycle your company is in, right? The earlier stage you're in, the more people and the more innovative the solution you're bringing to market versus kind of a legacy solution, the more they're going to want to hear other people that have experimented and taken the plunge with something new. Again, if you're selling to a total early adopter, they're going to buy it without references, right? We're talking the people that aren't really early adopters who need to hear the other people's experiences. So that again, you're never going to kill the need for references, but you can greatly reduce them, because salespeople cringe, right, when they're asked for the references, because they know they're going to lose some control here. You never know what that customer is actually going to say. Did they have a bad day? Did they have a fight with their spouse last night? Are they going to just be in a bad mood, or are they going to be in a great mood? And they take 2 or 3 weeks oftentimes to align calendars to get them to take place. So it's basically putting a wedge in your sales cycle. It's delaying it. It's giving competitors an opportunity to get in there, and it's making it really hard. And so if you can have this concept, I call it recorded references, but if you can find out and this is one of the things we do with our clients, we find out what are those 10 or 15 most frequently asked questions on customer reference calls. And let's interview a few customers and ask them those 10 or 15 questions and answer them with discrete little video snippets and publish that on something, put that into the hands of your sales reps right within Salesforce, where they can, or HubSpot, whatever CRM you're using, and allow your sales reps to try to use that now to deflect the need for live reference calls. Because it's going to do a number of things. One, it's going to allow the sales rep to respond right away when they get asked for the references. And so that you don't have that 2 or 3 week gap of scheduling. And so it's going to give the customer some of that satisfaction of hearing what other customers have to say. As I mentioned earlier, the second thing it's going to do is it's going to allow the sales rep to use those earlier in the sales cycle so that they can start to overcome doubts and earn brand preference earlier versus hoarding things until the end. And then ultimately, it's going to be a better experience for your customers who are giving that reference content. Because, and this has been my experience, I don't know if you have it too, but when we position this as an opportunity to customers to do one of these recorded reference interviews, they'll oftentimes say, I like doing reference calls because I like having conversations with customers, but what I don't like is having to answer the same 10 questions over and over and over again. So why don't you just record me answering the vanilla questions, and then I'll jump on the call and answer those 2 or 3 additional questions that are special, unique to this prospect. because some people still like doing the reference calls because they're expanding their network. And so now you're giving your customer a better experience because either they don't have to do reference calls at all, or you use them for other forms of advocacy, or when they do jump on calls to build their network, they're having a much richer, shorter but richer conversation and more meaty, where they're not just regurgitating the same thing that they say every time. And I've got customers, I can't say their name, but one customer in particular that's reduced the need for the live reference calls by 60%. But there's still that 40% that are now either shorter calls or they're things that are checking the box, or where somebody needs to dig deeper. Or it might also be the case because somebody that when people ask for references, they always want it to be the same industry, the same company size, the same region, the same this, the same that, same business model. So it has to be really similar. And sometimes you just don't have enough of those recorded references that fit every single permutation of selling situation that you might be in.
Got it. And yeah, that makes complete sense. And so reference calls, they're not going away. However, it sounds like the best practices in the future of customer advocacy is, more of a reliance on evidence and relatively less of a need for reference, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, less of a need for that live one-on-one reference call because you lose control when you have to set those up, but also doing it in such a way that it's making it more pleasant and enjoyable for your customers who are participating in your reference program. That's critically important too. You don't want to burn them out. You can't go back to the same customer and have them do 10 reference calls a quarter. They're going to finally say, "Don't you have anybody else? I mean, am I the only one that does this?" And for a lot of companies, they only have 2 or 3 customers that are willing to do reference calls. I mean, what do you do in that situation? So it's tough. That's why the value of the work that you and I both do. It's tremendous in helping reduce the need for these live one-on-one reference calls. Reduce it without eliminating it. I call it reference deflection. Just like you have support deflection in the call center, you try to deflect calls to self-service. Same thing. You're deflecting reference calls to self-service. That's my analogy.
It's a perfect analogy, and I think it's exactly in line with the really overall macro trends of buyers as well, which is of course self-service, right? For any marketing leaders, customer marketers, advocate marketers, or who are listening to this and maybe they love what they're hearing, but they feel like, man, we need to get started. We need to catch up. How should someone get started? If they haven't done a ton of, customer stories, and don't have a very robust sort of library or practice yet of creating, these customer stories.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I work with companies that are just starting all the time like that. Their first dipping their toe in the water of knowing that they need to do this, knowing that they need customer proof. But where do we start? Usually where people do start, unfortunately, is, okay, we're going to follow the traditional mindset, which is to write a case study, and so because nobody ever got fired for writing a case study, and there's still so many executives and sales leaders, they still think that that's the bright shiny object, that's still the best you can do. They're not familiar with some of these better ways of doing things. So a lot of times the marketers or sales enablement people, or even if it's a very small companies, they're the one person responsible for the whole go-to-market strategy. They're getting this pressure from above to just write more case studies. But what I suggest they do is, I wouldn't even start there, because that's too hard. I would start with, first of all, even just ask around your company, the people that have been dealing with your early customers, and find out, where's the rub when we try to sell? What are the objections that frequently get raised? Things like that, and figure out, just come up with a list of 5 insights that if we could capture this in our customer's voice, this would knock down this objection and accelerate sales cycles in this situation, or this would make these marketing campaigns that much more effective, or this would overcome this huge mindset that people have that's antiquated, that keeps us from being ready to buy the solution that we offer. Right? If you can really focus in on something like that, and then work with a firm like me, work with your firm, work with themselves, do it themselves, pick up the phone and call the customer and ask them a couple of questions and record the phone call. Just get a few audio snippets, right? Because that's going to then allow you to prove to your management team that this stuff works, right? Even if you started with recording an audio call, phone call, and gathered a few of these snippets with customers that are sharing these insights that knock down those biggest obstacles, you're then going to see the needle move, and that's really what you want to do. And by doing that, you're going to have more confidence that this is the right angle. You're going to learn more about your market because of the insights that you gather from your customers, and you're going to get more willingness from the people that own the purse strings for your company's budget to say, let's put a little more gas into this. And that's when they might be, at that point, ready to more formalize the program and be more ready to work with Testimonial Hero or SlapFive, right? When they're ready to kind of step on the gas and do this in a more formalized way, more professional way, and more scalable, repeatable way. But I do think you can start. I have to say, like I was just last week, or the week before, I think I gave a presentation at the HubSpot Inbound conference and it was exactly this, to small business owners who are HubSpot users, and I had 150 emails afterwards from people because asking either for an offer that I had on best questions to ask or things, but they all kept saying this was so timely because we're chartered with doing something in this space and we've never done anything here before. So if you do that, again, start by making sure you're addressing some of the biggest challenges that you have or the biggest mindset shifts you need to make. Get some customer voice and start to use it and see how it works, and be agile about it, right? As you try it and learn, test it. If this is ineffective, then that wasn't the right insight. The other thing that I can tell you is that with all the clients I work with, when they start to put these customer proof points and customer voice snippets into the market and sales starts to use them, sales tends to learn even more what the real objections are or what the real fears and doubts are. And so it's a great way also for you to see what's working in helping accelerate sales cycles, which at the end of the day, for a small company just getting started is what you're ultimately looking to do, right? You're looking to bring on more customers faster, and so that's just a quick way to get started.
I love that, and so true especially for the smaller companies, right? Is they're very revenue focused, right? They can't afford to sometimes play the long game. So getting those quick wins with the customer stories, that's such a good point. Fantastic. And so, Jeff, where can people get in touch, and learn more about you, learn more about SlapFive, which I highly recommend checking out. Yeah, where can people get in touch if they want to connect and learn more?
Yep, you can always find me at jeff@slapfive.com, JEFF, and SlapFive is spelled out SlapFive. I'm also Jeff Ernst on LinkedIn. if you want to check me out there, or SlapFive.com. And if you're intrigued by any of these ideas and things that I was sharing, as I said, I do have an ebook that's like, what's it called? It's from the horse's mouth. It's like how to get your customers to share their voice, which is usually the biggest challenge that people have, especially when they're first starting out, is I just don't know if I have any how to get my customers to want to play. And so that's usually the first hurdle. And as I said, we could do a whole session just on that. But ping me as well if you want that, or if you want the thing I mentioned that I offered at the HubSpot session, which is the best performing questions to ask your customers. That's also something I can send you. So people, if you want a copy of that, just email me at jeff@slapfive.com.
Love it. Thanks so much, Jeff. This has been great. We'll have to do a round 2 sometime.
Yes.
And yeah, have a great rest of your afternoon.
All right. You too, Sam. Thanks for having me, and continued good luck with your podcast series.
Awesome. Well, folks, that was a fantastic episode with Jeff Ernst, CEO at SlapFive. So many notes there, but the taking a more surgical approach to your customer stories, mapping out the QFDs, the questions, fears, and doubts, thinking about those frequently asked questions that buyers have, the value of authenticity and tone of voice and audio and video, the fact of customer stories being one of those last true competitive advantages, right? And of course, the two-way exchange of value, earned customer advocacy versus paid customer advocacy. So yeah, fantastic episode. We'll have links in the show notes. And again, this is the State of Customer Storytelling podcast, where we really dive in and explore how you can make customer stories your competitive advantage. And if you have any guests that you want to see on the future episodes, just shoot me an email. My email is sam@testimonialhero.com. Thanks so much, and we will see you in the next episode.